We're going to talk about something that your school might be doing that is against IDEA, that either they may not even realize it or you may not even realizing it, but it happens all the time, and it is something that more parents need to be aware of, and it's the concept and practice of predetermination. And what that means is that parents are an equal member of the IEP team. It's not a box that we check. It's not just to make sure that they feel important. Parents are an equal member of the IEP team. They are, which means they get a say in the decisions that are made that are around the IEP that are put into place. Let's be perfectly clear. As a special education teacher, I brought years of experience, education, and knowledge to the table, and my opinion and my professional expertise was important, and it was the driving thing in the goals that I wrote and the recommendations that I made for the team. But parents know their kids. And while they may not know them exactly in the school setting, they know their kids better than anyone. So remembering that you are an equal part of the team is super important. So let's get back into discussing what the concept and practice of predetermination is and what it means. So what does predetermination mean? That means if you show up to an IEP meeting, and I would say this is probably more common in initial IEPs than any other time, but if you show up to an IEP meeting and it's completely done and they more or less just want you to sign and they've made decisions on goals, placement, team, time for services, all of that, and they more or less are just checking a box with your presence, that is predetermination, and it is against the law. Our school's allowed to come to an IEP meeting with a draft proposed 100%. It's encouraged. It cuts down on the amount of time. I have never sat and wrote an IEP from scratch in an IEP meeting. Nobody has time for that. And I don't like to write my IEPs in an hour. It takes more thought. So while showing up with a draft is common and it's encouraged, at least from my perspective, there are decisions that I always tell parents, this is left blank on purpose because this is a conversation we need to have as a team. So if you show up to an IEP meeting and they have a draft, that's totally fine. That is not illegal. It's very common. But if they're saying to you, this is where your kid is going to be receiving their services, this is how much time they're going to spend in the general education classroom, that's a huge red flag. That is a huge red flag because that is predetermination. They already have it in their head what the placement of your child is going to look like. And placement is a team decision. And I'm going to say that again because it's super important that you hear me. Placement is a team decision. The continuum of services exists for a reason. And making decisions on where kids are going to receive their services is not the district's decision to make alone. I'm going to give you a hypothetical situation that may or may not have been a part of my orbit lately. But the continuum of services typically goes like this. You have your kids that receive services in the general education classroom or minimal pull-out services for speech, OT, those kinds of things. Then you've got your kids that receive their services most likely in a resource room. They are educated with their peers for the majority of their day, but they usually get language arts and math instruction in a resource room because they're not doing grade level work. And then you have your special education classrooms that they are receiving the majority of their instruction in a special education classroom, and they're participating with their peers in lunch, recess specials, those kinds of things. Hypothetically, if a district decides that one of those placements does not exist because the position is too hard to fill, let's just say a resource room, and that resource room does not exist, they're going to take all of those kids that were in the resource room and they're going to put them in inclusion now. And maybe a couple of them might get moved into a special education classroom because we don't have enough room. Maybe their needs are a little bit more severe, so we're going to put them in a special education unit, but we're going to put the rest of the kids in inclusion because resource doesn't exist anymore. That's illegal. And the district making that decision without the conversation with the parents, without the parents being involved and having a say in the placement for their student is illegal. If there is an IEP in place that says the student is going to receive their instruction in a resource room and the district just decides that resource room does not exist anymore, they are violating the IEP. IEPs are legally binding documents. What's in them must be followed. It is not a suggestion. So if the district is doing things like that, that is predetermination, and they cannot make decisions on placement without the parents' input and say so. So if your district has done things like that in the past, please be aware of it and know this is when having an advocate and having somebody that knows the law is really important, because unfortunately because of money, nobody has any money, because of money, because of all sorts of situations, districts do cut corners. And I am not anti-public school. I am not anti-special education. These are my people. I'm not here to bash them, but I do think it's super important that parents know their rights. And when things like this happen, parents have the skills and the knowledge that equip them to advocate for their child and be an equal member of the team. So sorry this video is a little bit longer than usual, but it's a conversation that needs to be had. And it's something that if you have a student that you want more inclusion time for, or you're like, oh, this really isn't working, and you want to have a conversation about placement, these are things that you need to know. Every other part of the IEP is relevant to in predetermination, but I would say that placement, location of services, is probably the most common area in where parents don't historically get as much of a say when the right is yours to have a say. So thanks for hanging in there for this one, and I hope this helps. Let me know if you have any questions.